Common carp. How did the U.S. government accidentally create one of America's biggest freshwater pests on purpose? In the late 1800s, the U.S. government wasn't fighting carp, it was actively importing them, stocking them in waterways across the country as a promising new food source for a growing population. Common carp were already a staple in Europe and Asia, a deep-bodied fish covered in large overlapping scales, with two pairs of barbels near the mouth for rooting through mud in search of food. Here's the problem nobody fully anticipated. Common carp feed by rooting through bottom sediment, stirring up mud, uprooting aquatic plants, and clouding entire lakes in the process, degrading habitat for the native species that were already living there. Combine that with a genuinely astonishing lifespan. Some individuals have lived for well over 20 years, and you get a fish that doesn't just survive in degraded water, it thrives there indefinitely, while everything around it struggles. Today, common carp are established almost continent-wide, found from farm ponds to major river systems, viewed in the U.S. less as food and more as an unwanted fixture of murky water. But believe it or not, the next carp on this list was also imported on purpose, and in some places, wildlife agencies are still stocking it today. Grass carp. Can a fish actually mow an entire lake? Stock a pond with just a handful of grass carp. Come back a year later, instead of the thick underwater weeds that used to choke the water, you might find open water with almost nothing left growing at all. That's not an exaggeration. A single grass carp can eat several times its own body weight in vegetation per day, and some individuals grow past 80 pounds. Grass carp are native to Eastern Asia, imported to the U.S. in the 1960s and 70s specifically to solve a real problem. Excessive aquatic weed growth, choking ponds, canals, and reservoirs. Used carefully, it still works exactly as intended. Many states today stock only sterile, triploid grass carp, engineered specifically so they can't reproduce if they escape containment. But fertile grass carp did escape decades ago into the Mississippi River system, and where they've established themselves, they strip waterways of vegetation almost entirely, destroying the exact habitat native fish, waterfowl, and invertebrates depend on to spawn, feed, and hide from predators. Common carp uprooted plants by accident, stirring up the bottom as a side effect of feeding. This next fish doesn't stir anything up, it just eats the plants completely, on purpose, by design. Silver carp. Picture cruising down the Illinois River at 30 miles an hour. Suddenly, without warning, a 50-pound fish launches itself directly toward your face. That's not a rare freak occurrence on some stretches of river. It happens constantly, and it's the reason silver carp have become the most infamous fish on this entire list. Silver carp are native to Eastern Asia, imported to the southern U.S. in the 1970s for plankton and algae control in aquaculture ponds. Flooding let them escape into the Mississippi, Missouri, and Illinois river systems, where they now filter enormous volumes of plankton daily, outcompeting native filter feeders and the larval stages of nearly every other fish in the food web. But here's the part that made them famous. They don't jump because they're hunting or migrating or doing anything remotely purposeful. Boat motor vibrations trigger a violent startle reflex, and the fish launch several feet into the air, sometimes dozens at once, in every direction. Some individuals have been documented leaping over 10 feet. There are real, documented cases of boaters suffering broken bones and concussions from getting struck mid-leap. On the worst stretches of the Illinois River, outfitters now rig actual protective screening around boat engines and passengers. Up until now, every carp on this list has damaged ecosystems from below the surface. This next one is currently costing millions of dollars just to keep it from ever reaching one of the largest freshwater systems on Earth. Bighead carp. What fish are scientists spending millions of dollars trying to stop right now? Bighead carp arrived in the U.S. alongside silver carp in the 1970s, imported for the same pond cleaning purpose and escaped through many of the same flood events into the Mississippi River system. They grow even larger than silver carp, some individuals surpassing 100 pounds, roughly the size of an adult human, and while they lack the dramatic jumping behavior, they filter plankton just as aggressively, pulling food directly away from native fish larvae trying to survive their first vulnerable weeks of life. Here's the detail that should actually worry you. Bighead carp have been steadily advancing up connected waterways toward Lake Michigan for years. Underwater electric barriers, literally charged sections of canal built specifically to repel fish, exist for one reason: to keep bighead and silver carp out of the Great Lakes. A successful invasion there wouldn't just damage one river, it would mean competing directly with the base of a food web supporting a multi-billion-dollar commercial in sport fishery. This isn't a disaster that already happened
somewhere far away. It's one still being actively, expensively fought off in real time right now. Silver and bighead carp threaten the food web from the middle of the water column. This next carp goes straight for what's living on the bottom, and it might be the one that scares biologists the most.
Black carp. Which carp scares biologists the most? They don't have sharp teeth. They don't need them. Black carp were imported from Asia for a narrow, specific purpose: controlling parasitic snails in catfish aquaculture facilities, since certain snails can transmit disease to farmed fish. They escaped through many of the same flood events and containment failures that released their carp relatives. But unlike silver and bighead carp, black carp specialize in something far more targeted: mollusks. Hidden inside their throat, not visible, not obvious from the outside at all, are powerful crushing plates capable of shattering the shells of snails and freshwater mussels with ease. Here's why that single detail makes them the most dangerous fish on this list. North America holds the most diverse and most endangered freshwater mussel fauna on Earth, with many species already down to a handful of surviving populations after a century of habitat loss and pollution. A fish specifically built to crush and eat exactly those mussels, introduced at scale, could finish off species that decades of expensive conservation work have been trying to save. Black carp can also live for decades, and they're far harder to detect than their more conspicuous relatives. No leaping, no visible schools, just quiet, targeted damage below the surface. Biologists still aren't entirely sure how far they've already spread. Every carp so far has been a warning. This next one is almost unbelievable.
Crucian carp. Which fish can survive months without breathing at all? Crucian carp are native across much of Europe and Asia, smaller and stockier than common carp, without barbels near the mouth. What sets them apart isn't how they look, it's what happens inside their body every winter. Crucian carp are one of the only vertebrates on the planet capable of surviving months with zero oxygen by converting lactic acid into ethanol and releasing it out through their gills. Read that again. This fish quite literally makes alcohol inside its own body just to survive being sealed under ice in a frozen pond for an entire winter, while almost every other fish in that same pond would suffocate. That extreme hardiness has made Crucian carp both a resilient native species across their natural range and a growing concern anywhere they've been introduced outside it, because once established, there's almost no environmental condition that can stop them. We've gone from fish that damage ecosystems to a fish that cheats death itself every winter. Now it's time to meet a carp treated less like an animal and more like living artwork. Koi. How can one single carp sell for over $1 million? Koi are ornamental variants of common carp, selectively bred in Japan over centuries for one purpose only: color and pattern. Not food, not utility. Vivid orange, white, black, and gold markings prized in ornamental ponds around the world. Elite show-quality koi, bred to meet exact pattern standards, has sold at auction for well over $1.8 million for a single fish. Some famous koi, according to debated but widely cited records, have lived for more than 200 years. But here's the twist. Koi are still, genetically, common carp. Release one into open water instead of a contained backyard pond, and within a few generations, its offspring can revert toward wild coloration and start behaving exactly like the invasive common carp we opened this video with, rooting through sediment, degrading water quality, doing damage no one would expect from a fish once worth more than a house. It's the same species living two completely different lives, depending entirely on which side of a garden wall it ends up on.
Mirror carp and leather carp. Why would European anglers spend years of their lives chasing a fish nobody even wants to eat? Mirror carp and leather carp are really the same story told two ways. Both selectively bred variants of common carp, developed centuries ago in European aquaculture for a purely practical reason. Scaling a fully scaled carp for the table was tedious work, so breeders created versions with far fewer scales. Mirror carp have just a handful of large, irregular scales scattered across an otherwise smooth body. Leather carp have almost none at all, giving them a smooth, rubbery skin. That practical fix from centuries ago has turned into something nobody could have predicted. Today, mirror and leather carp are among the most sought-after trophy fish in European specimen angling. Individual fish are recognized, named, and tracked by dedicated anglers for decades, targeted specifically for their size and rarity, with almost nobody intending to eat them at all. A variant bred purely to save time in a kitchen has become a lifelong obsession for anglers, chasing one specific famous 30-year-old fish they already know by name.